recorded, and then it goes onto YouTube. I've not worked that one out yet. I've had quite a few other projects to do at home while I've been off for 3 weeks, more the home projects to do. So I've not been too involved, but I have got other ideas I will be developing in the next month or two.
Fabulous.
Everybody.
Good morning, Yona. Welcome aboard.
How are you?
Baruch Hashem. Good to see your names up here. If you point in your camera, we'll be able to see you. No pressure.
Wait, I pressed the wrong button.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good, good.
Baruch Hashem. We're going to get started, if that's okay, and we'll have 2 questions along the way. But if you have any comments, suggestions to make, feel free to speak up. We've got a loaded week. I say loaded week, it's because on the calendar it's loaded. Also, the Parshah is loaded. It's a double Parshah again. And that's the first step of what's going on special this week. We're finally catching up with the Holy Land of Israel. Ever since Shavuos, we've been 1 week behind. Why have we been 1 week behind? Because in Shavuos, we had 2 days Yom Tov, and in Israel, they only had 1 day Yom Tov. In Israel, they had Shabbos was a regular Shabbos, and therefore they read a Parsha, and they got 1 week ahead of us. We were 1 week behind. And ever since we're being behind 1 week at a time, and now this week, finally, we'll do 2 Parshas, and they'll see just the second one, and going forward, we'll be together. So in a sense, it's like bringing peace, bringing Yiddish people together. I'm getting a little bit of feedback there, but it's okay. So that's one special thing on the calendar, that we are catching up to our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land of Israel. Number 2, this week's parasha is also very special. We have the prophecy of the coming of Mashiach. The prophecy of the coming of Mashiach is not mentioned explicitly anywhere in the Torah. The closest we get is what we have in this week's parasha, where Bilam, the non-Jewish prophet, looks into the future and he says, I want to share what's going to be the future of this people. And he mentions the rising star of Mashiach that will come and save the people. So that's the closest we have to an explicit prophecy in the 5 books of the Torah about Mashiach. You've got to imagine that at that stage in Jewish history, they were still looking forward to going to Israel for the first time, let alone being thrown out of Israel and being brought back with a final redemption. So a reference to Mashiach in the Torah is very far, but Bilam does, because Bilam says exactly that. I see it, but it's not now. It's in the distant future. And there he refers to Dorach Kochav Miyakov, the star will rise from Yaakov, and he gives the whole analogy backwards and forwards. So that's another important thing that's going on in the Jewish calendar. Our Mashiach connection in the entire 5 books, and most explicit in this week's parasha. One more thing, and that is much more recent. 1927. How long ago was 1927? Not so long ago. And in that year, it was during the communist war against religion, and in a very strong way, closer to home, against Jewish practice. It wasn't the only war they were fighting, but for us, it was very, very significant how difficult it became to keep Jewish traditions and mitzvahs in the Soviet Union. And in 1927, on the 12th day of Tammuz, which will be this Shabbos, it became the anniversary, became the date where Jewish people around the world celebrated a mini victory. What was the mini victory? At the time, there weren't many people who would stand up publicly to Stalin and to the communist negation of Russia. Oh, we got a message here. And let me put here. Oh, reminder to mute everyone. Let's do that. Anyone who wants to unmute, please do so at any time. Thank you. Who just I'm going to redo that. Okay. Where's it from Yona? Thank you. Okay, so that in Shabbos Kodesh, 1927, 12th of Tammuz, the anniversary when the man who stood up to Stalin was released from jail. And the truth is, it was a string of miracles, simply because in those days, nobody asked too many questions. If they needed to knock somebody out, hit somebody, bump somebody off, God forbid, it didn't take much. And in a string of miracles, when they tried to eliminate Chas v'Shalom, Rabbi Schneerson, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, they sent him down a hallway, literally. He talks about he was sent down a hallway and he was told, go to the door at the end of the hallway And there they'll do a questionnaire. And he finds himself in one of the most difficult prisons at the time. And he realizes that I'm walking by myself. They've sent me down the hallway on my own. There's no guards leading me. I might take a break and I'll sit down on a bench. He turns into a side hallway. And it was there that he met somebody who knew his family, knew where he came from, and they redirected him to a different hallway. Turns out, had he walked through the door that they sent him, and the reason why he was going alone is because anyone who walked through that door, they were firing squad, asked no questions. That was the way they eliminated, especially religious leaders. The night that he was brought in, there was 19 other religious leaders. None of them were Jewish. He was the only Jew, but also religious leaders, and none of them survived the night. They all walked through the same door. And he, by divine providence, was feeling tired, looking for a place to sit down, and his life was spared right then and there. He still was in the jail, and the whole story, how he came out, enormous amount of international pressure. Amazing. The international Jewish community went into overdrive, but they had pressure coming even from the Americans, but mainly from Latvia and from Germany, where major Jewish business people lobbied their governments to put pressure on the Russians to be able to get him released. It was enormous amount of Jewish unity that brought about that day. But when he was released, it was an internationally Jewish recognized win. Eventually, he came to leave the former Soviet Union. And when he then visited the United States of America, wherever he went, crowds gathered to hear the man who stood up to Stalin. And this is the date, the 12th of Tammuz. What does it mean to us? It means that sometimes we have to look down the Yetzer Hara in the face, the urges and the impulses of our own inclination. And sometimes our own inclination is driven by outside forces that either are laughing and scoffing at us, or making challenging remarks, or making it difficult to be true to what we know we're supposed to be doing. That just makes it very uncomfortable. And this week we celebrate, yes, we can. Yes, we can. We can do it. And that doesn't mean it's easy, but we win. And it's not like all or nothing. Every time I get to do the right thing, I should know I can. And I should encourage myself. And we should all encourage ourselves to be able to keep on doing. So this week in the Jewish calendar, especially in the Chabad calendar, it's a big day. It's full of energy. And it's energy that is encouraging us to keep on growing in our own personal journey of doing the right thing, being purposefully minded. So that's a little bit about what's going on in the calendar. Let's shift from here to do a summary of two parashas wrapped into one. Two loaded parashas, I should say. One of them is Chukas, and the second one is Balak. Chukas and Balak. Each one has their own unique element. We'll start off with Chukas. Chukas is unique in the sense that, first of all, it spans 40 years. With the beginning of the parasha starts off with the mitzvah of the red heifer, the red cow that was the least understood mitzvah. It's so hard to explain what the story of the red cow is. Somebody's gone to a levaya. Someone went to a Beis Olam, a cemetery. Someone came in contact with a dead person. So the halacha is you can't go into the Beis Hamikdash. Impurity. You have contracted tum'ah, ritually impure. The only way to get rid of that impurity, not good enough to go to the mikveh, it's not good enough to take a shower. Got to have the ashes of the red heifer mixed into water and sprinkled on me day number 3 and day number 7 after contracting the tumah and the healing on the purification process. What's with ashes, red cow, water, 3 days, 7 days? None of it is explained. And to make it even more complicated, the kohen, who was the serviceman who would administer the healing, the purification process, had to be in his pure state. He couldn't do the service of helping someone become pure unless he himself was in a state of purity. But by doing so, by helping somebody else become purified, the kohen would have to then himself deduct his level of purity, and he himself would have to go to mikveh afterwards because he would contract some sort of impurity. And the person who's making me pure, he himself becomes impure. So the pure become impure and the impure become pure. It's like all of it didn't make sense. And it was particularly done that way. And it's known as the number one statute, the number one irrational, non-explainable mitzvah. The number one mitzvah that's not understandable is in this week's parasha, And that's why the name of the parsha is exactly that. Chukah. Chukas means a mitzvah that doesn't make sense. It's not a logical mitzvah. It's a supra-logical, super-rational. It's beyond logic. It's greater than logic. We don't have the software installed into our minds that can handle this sort of program. We just know what it has to do. We know we have to push which buttons. Why or how they are programmed, what Hashem had in mind, we are not told. Some mitzvahs do make sense. Don't kill. We can get that. Easy. Don't steal. We get that also. Even Shabbos we can semi-get. But some mitzvahs are beyond. So that's the general gist of the first parsha. And from there, it suddenly skips 40 years. The end of the sojourn of Jewish people in the desert. So last week we read, 2 weeks ago we read that the Jewish people were punished, that they were going to have to stay 40 years in the desert because of the spy story. And now we read what happens towards the end of those 40 years. And the parsha tells us the end of 40 years, the water well that watered the Jewish people throughout the 40 years, all of a sudden dried up. Now you can imagine it became the new normal. For 40 years, anyone who was born in the desert knew nothing else. They just knew bread falls from heaven and water comes from this miraculous well. We pick up and we move our camping site. The water well comes with us. However crazy that sounds, clearly a miracle water well. It didn't draw water from the ground. It moved with the people. How, you just try to explain that to your child, to yourself. The water well was so miraculous. But in this week's parsha, it describes that all of a sudden, miracle stops. How did it stop? Miriam, Moshe Rabbeinu's sister, passes away. And when she passed away, the water well stopped. And that's when everyone realized that all these years, it must have been her merits. It must have been her zechus. And they named the water well Be'er Shem Miriam, the well of Miriam. Because they now realized how all these years, 40 years or 39 years, it all been coming in her merit. But they still needed water. And whilst Moshe and Aaron are still sitting shiva, they're still mourning for their sister, all of a sudden, there's complaints throughout the whole Jewish camp. Everyone's screaming and shouting, and they're all worried. What happened? There's no water. What's going to be? We're going to dry out. We're going to dry out. And they come running to Moshe. Moshe and Aaron realize there's a major issue. They get up from the shiva. In the middle of morning, they run to the Mishkan. And they say to Hashem, Hashem, what's going to be? The Jewish people need water. And Hashem says to Moshe, the famous story, to go and talk to the rock. And as you know, the story continues. He ends up hitting the rock. But there's a whole story of how Moshe Rabbeinu is punished. And eventually the water comes back. The parasha also talks about when Aaron passes away. And when he passed away, the clouds of glory that protected the people disappeared. There was a little war, skirmish between the Amalekim and the Jewish people. And Moshe Rabbeinu brought the clouds back. But in the meantime, the Jewish people complained again. And then Hashem's like, hold on, this is too much. All of a sudden, there was an outbreak of snakes, poisonous snakes coming into the community, and people were being bitten. It was very dangerous. Moshe to daven to Hashem, and this is when Hashem tells Moshe, make a brass snake and hang it on a pole. If you ever seen the symbol of the medics, the symbol of the medicine, when you have a snake wrapped around the stick, it's from this week's parasha, because the Jewish people were told, look upwards. Realize that the snake has come from Hashem. Hang the snake up, not on the ground where you think snakes are from earthly, mundane things. Recognize that the snakes are a messenger from Hashem. And when you recognize that, that will bring healing, and it did. Amazingly. In the end of Parshas Chukas, you have the first bit of the Jewish people starting to make home in Israel. This was on the east side of the Jordan River, which today is called Jordan and partially Syria. And that's where the Jewish people conquered the first pieces of land on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. It was the areas of Sichon and Og. That's Parshas Chukas in a nutshell. As you can see, it's a loaded parsha. So many things going on, so many stories, and it's clearly so many life lessons in it. In Parshas Balak, it's a little bit more, it's also an elaborate parsha, but it's easy to summarize. One of the neighboring countries of the countries that had just been conquered was Balak's country called Moab. And in Moab, he was worried that he'll be next. And therefore, he was very worried that the Jewish people run over his country. So he tried to hire a sorcerer, someone should come and curse the Jewish people. And he hired Bilam. Bilam was the soothsayer who came from a place called Midian, until he invited him, till he came, and then he tried to curse the Jewish people. And every time he opens up his mouth to try and pour his wrath and his curses against the Jews, Hashem twists his tongue, and only blessings come forth. Some of the most beautiful brachas we ever have in the entire Torah for the Jewish people come from this anti-Semite. He literally wanted to curse the Jews, but every time he opens his mouth, the most beautiful blessing came forth. But before he leaves, he says, you know what? I failed to curse the Jewish people. I've told you about Mashiach, told you about all the things that are going to happen to the enemies of the Jewish people, and I've not helped you with cursing the people. But I'll give you one idea. And unfortunately, this idea was too good, and it really worked. What was the idea? His idea was that we have to cause the Jews to bring it upon themselves. And the idea was get the Jews to sin, and that will make Hashem really upset at the Jewish people, and that'll be enough. And unfortunately, he had a very good plan, and it worked too well. It wasn't that most of the Jews, it was a minority, but it meant that his plan worked. What he did is he sent in the girls to entice the Jewish boys and get them to worship their idols. That you have idolatry and adultery wrapped in one. Both of two of the top cardinal sins. And that was the end of the parsha, is that a lot of the Jewish boys fell for it. And at a certain point, one of the Jewish leaders, the leader of the tribe of Shimon, Zimri, came before Moshe with a Midianite princess and challenged Moshe and says, can I live with this girl or not? And if you tell me not, you also are married to a Midianite girl. How dare you? Because Yisro, Jethro, was from Midian. Difference was she converted, she became Jewish. But this was a Midianite girl, out of nothing to do with getting married or becoming Jewish. And he, in front of Moshe, desecrated Hashem's name, made a laughingstock, at least tried to, of Moshe, and went off into a tent with this with this Midianite princess, defiant, trying to prove a point that it's okay to not follow the rules. And Pinchas, who was Moshe Rabbeinu's nephew, great nephew, the grandson of Aaron, stormed into the tent after Zimri and Cosby, and by killing the two of them in the act, he caused a plague to stop and saved the lives of many people. Next week's Parsha will be Parshas Pinchas, in which we will elaborate why it was commendable, why Hashem was so pleased with his act of almost zealousness, where he literally killed someone without trial. He stormed in, which is a conversation in itself, and that's the end of the Parsha. So again, a loaded Parsha, the whole story of Balak and Bilam, and then the whole story of Zimri and Cosby, and all of that squashed into 1 week of learning. So if you have spare time throughout the week, there's plenty to look up. But for today, we're going to focus on one area, and we're going to try and walk away with a relevant, practical life lesson that can help us in 2020, in today's day and age. So if anyone has any questions, please unmute yourself. I am talking to quiet, but I hope everyone's listening, getting involved. We're going to get into a point that I think is extremely relevant, and it's going to be the lessons for leadership. Leadership plays in... Oh, is it a question?
Levi, yes.
Please.
I'm not sure where I have heard the story or where I read the story, but the commentary that Moshe had to speak to the rock, I hear for the first time. I thought Moshe was punished for disbelieving that the rock would give water. So the God told him, go to the rock, hit the rock with a pole, and it will give you water. And he not really disbelieved. He wondered that, is it really possible? And because he wondered, he was punished.
Yaina, you're on the ball, because we're going to talk exactly about that, and we're going to mention both of those explanations. Yes, okay. Well said. That's going to be the point of conversation. Moses hits the rock. Now, I must say that it's very easy for us to delve into a conversation about what was the sin of Moses, because traditionally there was one sin that Moses did throughout his life, and that was the hitting of the rock. Okay, And for the one sin, there are literally tens of commentary of what that sin was, because we'll read the verses soon, and it's very, very vague about what happened. We do know is that Hashem was furious, very upset, and the punishment, the price that Moshe Rabbeinu paid for whatever the sin was sky high. That sort of punishment, it indicates that something clearly was wrong. 1 second. Please. Okay, okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. Back to what we're talking in my head. So we were saying that Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses clearly did something wrong. What it was is very vague, and there's multiple levels of commentary. We're going to be reading also later that there are 70 levels of understanding for each thing. And today we'll focus on maybe 3 or 4 of them. I just want to use an example. A great teacher of mine, Rabbi Chazan, often I've heard him say it a few times, but it works for me. It's really good. And he explains, how do you have one idea with different commentaries? One of them is right and one of them is wrong, it would seem. So I once, many times, heard him say this explanation, and I feel like it helps us understand what we're saying. He was talking about the Niagara Falls. And you go to Niagara Falls and it's just amazing. So it depends who you ask. Some people, when they go there, let's say this person is a painter. So when they go to the Niagara Falls, they see a fantastic scene to paint. And that's what the Niagara Falls is to them. If you go to a bride and groom who are getting married, to them the Niagara Falls is a wonderful backdrop on which to set up their wedding celebration. And that's what it is. It's an environment, an atmosphere that it creates. If you go to a scientist, he'll explain to you the idea of the science behind why the Niagara Falls came about and how it works. If you go to a historian, he might see it as a historical fact of when it started and what sort of historical facts are about it. And if you go to an engineer, the engineer will tell you, no, the Niagara Falls is a source of tremendous energy. The amount of power you can reach and retain and draw from this tremendous falling of water. And which of them are right? All of them are right. None of them are wrong. But each one of them is seeing it from a different perspective. I love it. It helps us understand that the same concept in Torah can have multiple levels of understanding. From a simple understanding of a story that took place, it teaches us a story. If we dig a little deeper, we learn about the characters of the story. And what about them is it? Dig a little deeper and see the wording that Torah uses to describe the story. The choice of words are also indicators of a lesson. Who's this? Asher?
Yes.
Please, how can I go on? I'm listening.
I just wanted to say that what you're talking about now relates to Shivim Panim.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shivim Panim is a reference, we'll see this
Shivim
soon.
Panim la Torah. 70
faces of the Torah. So the general idea is that in each teaching, there are many, many understandings. We're going to get to the point because there are three, or at least 3, and not 4 answers to the question, what was Moshe's sin? And the reason why we ask the question is because the answer is going to have a lesson to us. It's going to be a lesson. Considering that Moshe Rabbeinu was the number 1 leader of the Jewish people, historically, to date, Moshe Rabbeinu is the number 1 leader. And if we want to learn something in leadership skills, looking at Moshe Rabbeinu is a great place to start. But as part of human nature is that when we see a mistake that someone made, it gets highlighted automatically in our head. We are drawn towards it. So if the Torah describes a mistake that Moshe Rabbeinu made, there must certainly be a practical, helpful lesson to learn what not to do, which would explain why the Torah would describe the mistake. It would justify, so to speak, why the Torah would highlight a wrongdoing, if you like, so to speak, of Moshe Rabbeinu. We're going to learn a leadership skill from the mistake that Moshe made. Now, it's important to say that we are not the judge. We certainly don't feel in a position to judge Moshe, but we are going to try and learn a lesson from the way the story seems to us considering and understanding the lessons the way it's brought down in the commentary. So diving right in, we have it. Miriam's well followed the Jewish people throughout the 40 years they traveled in the desert. The well of Miriam was one of the miracles that was so enormous. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos describes it was a miracle that was invented 2,500 years before it went live. It was waiting and pending as part of creation. That's how enormous the miracle was. It had to have been built into creation, such a phenomenon. Let's read the Mishnah here in Pirkei Avos. It's brought down, sorry, it's in the Talmud. In the Masechet Pesachim, our rabbis taught 10 things were created on the eve of Shabbos at twilight. So on the 6th day of creation, just before Shabbos, there were 10 miracles that were prepared. They are the well, which is the one we're talking about, the manna, the rainbow, the writing instruments, the tablets, sculpture of Moshe, and this cave in which Moshe and Elijah stood, the opening of the donkey's mouth, which is also in the 6th parasha, the opening of the earth's mouth to swallow up the wicked, which was last week's parasha, and all these things were created at the beginning of creation, which tells us that the story of the well is a big story. But more so, well, says Rashi, the well refers to the well of Miriam, the rock from which Moses brought out water. It wasn't just a watering hole. It was round and sieve-like, and it went along with them wherever they would go. So if you're thinking of a well, as we know it, a hole in the ground with water coming up, Rashi tells us actually no, it wasn't quite like that. It was much more miraculous than that. There wasn't a hole in the ground. The water came from the rock, at least according to Rashi. And the hole brought up water. How enormous, how special. And when the Jewish people all of a sudden realized that it dried up, that's when they realized that it was Miriam's well. And that's when they came running to Moshe. And this is the text that describes how Moshe and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the door of the tent of meeting and fell upon their faces. The glory of Hashem appeared to them, and Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and your brother Aaron, and speak to the rock in their presence, so that it will give forth its water. You shall bring forth water from them, from the rock, and give the congregation and their livestock to drink. What were they told to do? To talk to the rock or to hit the rock? Read the text.
Talk to the rock. Talk to it.
Does it say anything about taking a stick? You're right. It does say speak to the rock, but it does say kaches matcha, take your staff and assemble the congregation, you and your brother Aaron, and then it says speak to the rock. So that's an interesting note. Were they told to speak to the rock, or were they told to take the staff to the rock?
No, in Hebrew it's just telling clearly that it says take the rock with you.
Yeah, take the staff with you. Take the stick.
Take it with you, and then collect all the people, you know.
Yes, correct.
Aaron and your brother, and then talk to the rock.
So clearly they were told to talk to the rock. Absolutely. So in the verses described, talk about you shall bring forth water from them, the rock, and then everyone will have to drink. What happens actually? Moshe took the rod from before Hashem as he commanded him. Moshe and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock, and he said to them, now listen, you rebels, can we draw water from you from this rock? Moshe raised his staff, and he raised his hand and struck the rock with the staff twice, when an abundance of water gushed forth, and the congregation and the livestock drank. So for some reason, Moshe calls them rebels. Can we draw water from the rock? Then he hits the rock, but not once. He hits it twice. And then water gushes forth, and everyone drinks. Moshe took the rod from Hashem as he commanded, and Moshe and assembled the congregation from the rock. That's the same thing twice. Okay. Hashem is furious. And he says to Moshe, since you did not have faith in me to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly to the land which I have given them. These are the waters of strife for the children of Israel contended with Hashem, and he was sanctified through them. Hey, Hannah, I'm busy now. Do you want to come back soon?
I'm hungry.
You're hungry? Okay, so when we go home, you can have something to eat. Okay? Gorgeous. I'll see you soon. Hannah, wir bleiben noch, kannst bleiben noch, wenn du schön in der anderen Zimmer. So that's the story. The story is that Moshe Rabbeinu does something wrong, and Hashem is upset. But interestingly, he says here, the reason why he's going to be punished is because you did not have faith in me to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel. And this is what Yonah was referring to earlier, that the sin that is referred to here seems to be something to do with faith. Now, I'm going to point out that each one of these three readings have different indicators of what the problem was. We're going to learn multiple levels, as we said. We'll start off with a simple understanding of what the problem was. But before we do that, I was going to ask if anyone has, besides for the sin of not having faith, which isn't clear where that was demonstrated, what did Moshe Rabbeinu do wrong to deserve such terrible punishment? Anyone have any other suggestions? What might have been the sin that Moshe Rabbeinu committed? What was the problem with hitting the rock?
What you
Problem
said at the beginning, but please, Asher.
What's that?
Go on, please go on.
I just wanted to say that the same that you said at the beginning, that he hit instead of speaking.
Right.
That
So
is
the
kind of
mistake-
obvious.
if he was told one thing and did something else. Okay, but at the end of the day, you've got to remember that hitting and talking isn't so different. The punishment is extreme for that, but yes, that's one option. What were you going to say? Asher.
I was gonna say that when he hit it, he shouldn't have been hitting it. It should have been, oh, it's all spiritual. So that all he needs to just think and say it. That's it. Doesn't need to hit anything. So it's kind of lack of belief, or maybe something like that.
Beautiful. Okay, we're going along the same lines that the hitting was inappropriate and was told just to talk to it. What lesson can we learn from this story is probably the more relevant part of today's class. What does it mean to us? To go and delve into what Moshe Rabbeinu did wrong isn't necessarily the most important pastime we should do, although it's in the Torah. But here we have a question: how does it help us in today's day and age? So I'm going to ask you to come along, and we're going to learn a simple understanding from the Rashbam. The Rashbam says, like similar to what we've just heard, here's the 70 lessons of the Torah, level upon level. The Rashbam says the following: the mistake he made, he erred with regards to Hashem's instruction to take the staff. He did not believe that he would bring forth water from the rock by speaking to it, but only by striking it, as he had at Rephidim. As for God's instruction to speak to the rock, he understood that God wanted him to speak to the rock by hitting it. What language does this rock understand? The rock understands the language of hitting. Hashem ultimately conceded and brought forth water as he hit it. Moshe was punished. For Hashem is particular with the righteous. Thus Hashem told him, because you did not believe in me to sanctify me by speaking to the rock, because he holds the righteous to account for deviating even a hair's breadth. This is like, it's almost, you feel bad for Moshe. Big deal. So instead of hitting the rock, speaking to the rock, he hit the rock. And his life dream, everything he dreamt of from the minute we meet Moshe, is he can't wait to go to the land where he's going to serve Hashem. And for one minor infraction, Hashem says, that's it. You ain't going in. That was it. In 1 second, the whole thing's changed. What did he do? Says the Rashbam, you're right. For most people, this is what you would call extreme reaction, almost unfair. But for a tzaddik, held to a higher standard, literally. Held to a higher standard to an extreme. Moshe Rabbeinu is expected to not deviate even the slightest, and therefore this is considered already enough of a problem, says the Rashbam, to help him banned from going into Eretz Yisrael. Unbelievable. This is the Rashbam's explanation, and we can kind of get it. We understand that Hashem wouldn't hold us accountable to that level, but Moshe Rabbeinu being the leadership, not only a leadership in Jewish practice, this is the tzaddik, and therefore the Rashbam's argument is that even that could be considered. Okay.
It's just that Moshe was so anav, and there was nobody in the world that was like anav. So how come he might have just done it, as anva? He didn't really understand what's going on. But probably Hashem, the connection that Hashem had with Moshe, he knew what what was behind it more that we can't see maybe.
Okay, that's going to be a deeper answer. But on the surface answer, level number one answer, we're just going to say Moshe Rabbeinu did something. Turns out it was a big mistake because from his level, he was expected to know higher. But as we read in here, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't ignore Hashem's command. He misunderstood Hashem's command. He took it out of context. Hashem said, speak. And he says, oh, I can't speak to a rock. It must mean hit. So the problem is that when Hashem says speak, he said, well, maybe it doesn't mean speak. But if that's not good enough, the Ramban wants us to know that he thinks that Moshe Rabbeinu had a good reason to make this mistake. What's the good reason to make the mistake? As we pointed out earlier, Hashem had told him to take his stick with him. Having commanded Moshe to take the staff, there's an implication that he should hit something with it. What else is he taking the staff with? If Hashem only wanted him only speech, why would there be a staff in his hand? So it was for the plagues in Egypt. Hashem tells Moshe the staff, which transformed into a stick, taking your hand, and the purpose was to use it for hitting. He hit the water, he brought a frog by hitting the water, he hit the ground, and it came out lice. Aaron did that, but the staff played a role when he had to take it with. So if Hashem tells him take the staff with, that seemed to be an indicator, the good reason for him to make the mistake that he did. And if that's not a good enough reason, in the next text we'll read that actually there's even a more compelling reason for him to make the mistake. And that is that Moshe Rabbeinu had used his stick to do exactly what he did 40 years earlier. When he first switched on the miracle well, 40 years earlier, Hashem had told him to hit the rock with his stick, which he did, and that's how it gave forth water. So when Hashem tells him now, 40 years later, take your stick with and talk to the rock, is even more excusable, you would think, that he assumed that talk to the rock means hit it. Let's put this on the text. Moshe cried out to Hashem, this is 40 years in the beginning, saying, what should I do for this people? Just a little longer and they will stone me. And Hashem said to Moshe, pass before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel. Take into your hand your staff with which you struck the Nile, and go and behold, I shall stand there with you there before you on the rock in Chorev, and you shall strike the rock. What will come out of it? And the people will drink. Moshe did so before the eyes of the elders of Israel. Moshe was commanded to hit the rock, which he did, and it gave forth water. And now 40 years later, again, he's been told to take the stick, and he's going to talk to a rock, which he assumes means to hit. But for Moshe Rabbeinu's standard, that's too much. And it's a sign
in a
of
way
lack of faith.
confusing. It's confusing in a way.
Very, very. And for most of us, we could never be able to decipher that. And the only way we can understand, at least on a basic level, is that for Moshe Rabbeinu's madrega, from his high, lofty standing, he's expected to be even more, totally be part of what Hashem wants, and therefore it's considered a sin. Okay. So though he had solid reasoning to assume hitting the rock was the answer, Moshe ultimately deviated from Hashem's words, and therefore it's considered a sin. That's the simplest understanding of the verses, and that's what the Rashbam and the Ramban and many other commentaries explain. That was level one. Let's dig a little deeper, level two, and that's going to be that actually it wasn't so much to do with how he treated the rock. It's how he treated the people by the rock. The fact that he hit the rock, okay, he didn't do exactly what Hashem had in mind, but the way he treated the people at the time wasn't acceptable. Not only wasn't acceptable, it wasn't leadership. When Hashem says to him, up until now, you were the type of leader I needed for the people. But now the disconnect between you and the new generation, you've got to remember it's 40 years later, it's the new generation, they need to have fresh blood. And therefore the punishment wasn't so much, oh, you're going to pay the price for this. The punishment was, effectively, Moshe Rabbeinu, you no longer are the ideal leader for a new generation. What was the wording that Moshe Rabbeinu used in which he didn't treat the people the way Hashem wanted from a leader? He called them Moirim. Moirim is almost, according to one explanation, is almost like the fools, I think it's similar in English. The word is moron, where a person is not clever, a person is foolish. Moshe Rabbeinu called the Jewish people a name because they'd been behaving so inappropriately. They had so many miracles, yet instead of coming to speak nicely and ask Moshe for what they needed, they came again to complain. And this idea of where the complaints are creating Hashem's unhappy reaction still hadn't taught them the lesson. But Hashem says, hold on 1 second. You might have a point that they should be better behaved. You can't call them names. You can't call the people names. And if you do, that's a sign that the respect that you as a leader need to have for the people is fading. And in that case, you can no longer be the person who will take the Jewish people into Israel. They'll have to have a new leader, and that will be Yeshua. Here's the Midrash Pesikta de Rav Kahana. Unbelievable Midrash. To what was Moshe analogous? To a king who placed his son under the charge of a teacher, a tutor, and instructed the tutor, do not call my son a murderer. What does murder mean? It's like the Greek word one shouts to a fool, moros. Moros being a Greek word for dull, slow, or stupid. Once it happened that the tutor called the boy moreh, the king said to him, with all my soul, I ordered you and said, do not call my son a moreh, and yet you called him a moreh. A wise man has no business with a fool. So it is written, and Hashem spoke to Moshe and to Aaron and commanded them to the children of Israel. What did he command them? He told them, do not call my children fools. Once they antagonized him at the waters of strife, which is this story over here after 40 years. And Moshe said to them, Shimu no ha-morim. Hear now, you morim. Hashem said to him, with all my being, I command you and told you, do not call my children morim. Now that you have called out moreh, a wise person not go along with a fool. In other words, says the Midrash, the problem wasn't the rock. The problem was that Moshe Rabbeinu had slighted the Jewish people. Yeah, but they were in a bad moment. Look how they behaved. Nonetheless, they are Hashem's children, regardless of how they behave. Let me rephrase that. We are Hashem's children, not because we've been well behaved. We aren't chosen because we are so good. We're chosen because Hashem chose us. That's what choice means. Hashem loves us just because. That's why we should behave. But we are Hashem's children, and therefore nobody should be calling out the Yiddish people. Encourage, uplift, build up, help grow, but not calling out. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu's crime, so to speak, was, according to the Midrash of Rav Kahana.
Levi?
Yes, please.
So Moshe made fun of the Jewish people, but conversely, after the sin of the golden calf, he pleaded with God to save them.
Correct.
So it's slightly at odds with the proportionality.
Yes, and that seems like similar to what we asked before. Isn't it still an overreaction, so to speak, on Hashem's part to punish them harshly? And the answer is, according to this midrash, a little easier to understand. Of course, you can say Moshe was held to a higher standard, but this midrash is a little easier to understand in the sense that we're not saying, Moshe Rabbeinu, you've done such a terrible crime, you have to pay a high price. That's not the angle this midrash is taking. This midrash is saying, we need to have a leader that can lead the people. And by making fun of the people, he's no longer a leader. And it's unbelievable to hear this being said about Moshe, as you just pointed out. This is the Moshe Rabbeinu who pleaded with Hashem over and over again, all on behalf of the people. Says the Midrash, yes, he was fantastic, but at a certain point, it was the next generation. And the next generation needed a different leader. It's unbelievable to hear a Midrash that. We would never be able to say that about Moshe on our own.
Levi,
Our Midrash is an interesting one. Go on, Yonah.
1 second. We're
Please.
saying the generation has changed. The generation is so bright and new.
No, not bright. The generation is dropped.
And refreshed. And these are the people who are going to enter the land of Israel. Why then they're still behaving the funny ways they usually did? Instead of being grateful and this and that, they still come and start complaining. Why don't they deserve the old behavior then?
The answer is that the new generation wasn't a better generation. The new generation was a drop in generation. And a drop in generation needs to have leadership that works for the people. In other words, the leader's job is not just to be the policeman. A leader doesn't have to be a policeman. The leader's job is to direct, to lead the people to being the best person you can be. And therefore, if the generation isn't yet at a level, or isn't at a level where they can handle Moshe Rabbeinu's madrega, Moshe Rabbeinu's input, then Moshe Rabbeinu is too advanced for them. And if Moshe Rabbeinu finds their sort of behavior foolish, and he's such an extent that he reacts that way, says Hashem to Moshe, that's gone. You're no longer relating. So yes, it wasn't because it's a high level, it's because the generation dropped. But most importantly, the lesson that we need to learn is not how we judge Moshe, but it's a leadership skill. If we're going to lead, we have to believe in the followership. If we're going to lead our family, if I'm going to lead myself, I've got to believe that yes, I can. If I go around beating myself up and calling myself names, I'm not going to be able to encourage myself to go forward. Equally, if I'm not going to believe in my family, in my community, in my friends, I won't be able to give them a leadership. I won't be able to uplift them, to direct them into growth. Unbelievable lesson this medrash is telling us. So we have two answers. The answer number one, that the greater we are, the higher standard we're held to. Number two, leadership means believe in your people and work with what you have. Work with what you have. It's much easier to say, well, if only with this, that, and the other. Certainly when it comes to a family or to a relationship, so easy to say, well, if only you did this. Leadership means that we believe in the followership and we work with what we have to lift it up. That's level number two. Let's dive into level number three. And with level number three, we're going to learn an unbelievable idea that the Rebbe shares. But this is Chassidus. And for now, we're going to leave behind a little bit the technical side of things. And we're going to go into the mystical side of things. So what happened behind the scenes? What was going on in the back end, in the spiritual makeup of what was taking place? In order to do that, we're going to talk for a second. There's a couple of texts that basically point out that everything that's happening in this world are a reflection of what's happening in the higher worlds. And therefore, if rock is giving water, that's a reflection of a spiritual rock giving forth spiritual water. And there's two ways to do that. If you hit the rock, that's a reflection of a spiritual striking of something. And if you speak to the rock, that's a reflection of a spiritual speaking to the rock to give forth water. That's the general gist and background of this answer. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and explore what is the spirituality of water, of a rock, of talking, of hitting, and what happened when Moshe struck the rock instead of talking to the rock. It's a brilliant idea, and it helps us understand what the significance of this event is to us in today's day and age. And basically, this particular minor came from, what's this quote here? Oh, this quote just tells us what water is in spirituality. What is water compared to? Or what is compared to water? Take it from our perspective. Torah. Torah is compared to water. Just like water, for a number of reasons. Number one, Torah gives us life. We say Torah gives us life and sustenance. Water brings life. It helps us grow. We need to we need to drink. We need to have water inside of us. But also, water comes from heaven, it rains down on us, and it's the same water which is in the cloud, which comes down. The same thing. Torah is a heavenly wisdom, and although it makes sense to us in a physical, logical mind, but it's the same logic that is godly logic. So although it's human logic, but what we understand as human logic is the same logic of Hashem. So Torah is compared to water in the sense that it's upon high and below in different forms. So the clouds aren't a bucket of water, slightly changed form, but it's the same water. And that's the same thing with Torah. Although now in this day and age, when we learn about the laws of borrowing money, and there's no money in heaven, but the idea of the Torah wisdom is godliness, the way it's taken on a new form. So it's compared to water. So Moshe Rabbeinu is going to draw water for the people. He's going to bring us Torah. And how's he going to bring us Torah? From a rock. What's a rock? So here we learn here that the idea of bringing forth water from the rock is from a place that is plain, non-understandable. It's hidden. The particular rock that was used is known as, it was a flintstone. What's the idea of a flintstone? A flintstone is the kind of stone that you use to create sparks of fire. Before we had matches and before we had lighters. So how would you create a fire? You would rub stones together and create a spark, and the sparks would fly enough and be able to start a fire. It was a big deal. So the rock is smooth and the rock is hard and all that you can see about the rock. But the fact that the rock can create sparks is true, but it's latent. It's hidden. It's not obvious. You've got to work hard to bring that out. And that's true about Torah also. Sometimes it's hard for us to be able to get our head around a concept in Torah. Perhaps this class is going on for so long. We're talking and talking. Sometimes to concentrate on what's going on in Torah is a challenge. So Moshe Rabbeinu is going to bring forth the water so that it's easy and user-friendly for us to have. So in order to make something understandable, that's like drawing water from a rock. Hannah, please come back soon, gorgeous. Okay? When you draw water from a rock, though, there's two ways to do it. We can either talk to the rock, or we could strike the rock. And the ideal, plan A, was that Moshe Rabbeinu would talk to the rock, and thereby he would arrange that being able to get our head around complicated things in Torah would be straightforward, smooth. You would learn, I sit down to try, and it would work. But instead, Moshe Rabbeinu struck the rock, which is the idea, at least metaphorically, of a struggle, which is why ever since then, in order for us to get the water, the freshness of Torah, it's not easy. Sometimes you get a head start, but generally, if you want to get into a good idea, it's not a simple thing to study Torah. If you want to properly engage in the idea of Torah, one has to work hard. And here, the Reb Doiber of Lubavitch says in Sha'arei Orah, this is caused by the fact that Moshe hit the rock. And Hashem was hoping that the Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, for years and generations to come, should be able to easily connect with Torah. But instead, Moshe Rabbeinu hit the rock, which caused a tremendous spiritual and therefore reflection all the way down to the way it works out in this world. The effect was enormous. What that teaches us is that when we do something here in this world, it's pushing a button. And the back of that button is wired up to enormous things. And when we do something good, it will help us. What goes around comes around. What we put in comes out. And this is one of those tremendous examples of what we put in comes back. But the last lesson, the fourth lesson, I want to grab very quickly, not in the text, but showing us one more idea. And that is that the rock could also be a metaphor for a stone heart. What's a stone heart? If someone has a stone heart, their feelings are numb. They don't care for something. And Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to draw water, life, from a rock-hard stone heart. Someone has a heart of stone, they don't care about nothing. And Moshe Rabbeinu, as the leader, is trying to draw out water, bring out life from a stone heart. This is from Rabbi Zevin. And he says, if you want to try and encourage somebody who is apathetic, indifferent, somebody who's not in it, I don't care, leave me alone, do whatever you want, but leave me, count me out. That's a rock-hard stone heart. And Moshe Rabbeinu is metaphorically trying to draw water from that sort of heart. And the lesson he teaches us, or the lesson we learn what not to do, don't hit it. Don't try and approach a stone heart with force. I'll prove it to you. I'll show you how important it is. Or I'll raise my voice and I'll convince you. I'll shout at you. How dare you do this, that, and the other. And Moshe Rabbeinu is supposed to be a leader. And the leadership skills have to recognize that if somebody's not ready for it, someone's heart is stone, the best way to work with it is to talk. And talk softly. Because when I talk to somebody and I engage with them, that's real leadership. It's not easy. That's the time where I can draw out water from even a rock. Meaning, in the metaphor, if there's somebody who is not ready to buy in, Moshe's effort to prevail upon the rock now became attempts to reach out and possibly to move a heart of stone, and his mistake was he was going to use force. Here, let's read text 18, and we'll call that Moshe's mistake as a leader was in his overtly harsh approach. And harshness sometimes is necessary. If I'm a parent, I've got to be tough with my kids sometimes. If I'm a teacher in a classroom, sometimes I have to be tough. But I shouldn't convince myself that the harshness is going to move the person. Being strict, it's going to create a framework. But moving, changing, growth isn't going to come from the framework. Growth is going to come from the encouragement that will encourage them along within the framework. The framework sometimes needs to be harsh. Think of a football team. So the coach has to be, give them sometimes some real harsh comments because otherwise they won't perform. But they've got to believe. They've got to be encouraged and lifted up and uplifted. This is Moshe Rabbeinu's lesson by writing in the Torah what not to do. So important. A real leader knows how to speak softly even when things aren't well. Let's read one more text. Text 18 right here. When words of rebuke are predicated, are introduced with, or built on Ahavas Yisrael, the single most important introduction, single most important preface to anything that has to do with helping somebody else, I have to think about them. I have to have their good in mind. Ahavas Yisrael, it's out of love for them. And if that's the approach, then one's entire approach is radically different. Instead of reproaching, one wishes only to protect the other person from their own error, and so on. In this case, it's no longer giving words of rebuke, but putting the other person on the right path. Then, that the way one speaks is also radically different. It's gentle, pleasant words, and ways of peace. In this manner, then, first and foremost, it is easy to see that this approach is far more likely to bear tangible results than what words will be received. So in a summary, we did 4 answers. Number 1, we recognized higher standards. The better we are, the more gifts and talents we have to hold ourselves to higher standards. Number 2, we went on to say that actually it's more than that. We said that we have to believe in our followership, believe in ourselves. If we want to encourage people to grow, we have to believe in them and uplift them. Number 3, we spoke about the fact that what we did in this world has tremendous effects in the spiritual, and that trickles down. Last but not least, number 4, we spoke about that when Moshe Rabbeinu tried to change the people with force, it doesn't work. To change a person, people change with goodness, with good words and with gentleness. The framework sometimes has to be firm, but the change and the growth will come with encouraging words. Thank you very much for listening, guys. A gentle and positive approach to others will have a better long-term effect. I just want to say I'm borrowing time here, but this past week on Thursday and Thursday, my wife and I are literally humbled by the outpouring of love. And I just want to say thank you very much. We really, really are so grateful for the tremendous success and encouraging words. And also the people literally gave their own hard-earned money towards the tzedakah. I want to say thank you and give each and every one of you, those who were able to help, those who encourage others to help, and those who care for us. Thank you. Hashem should bless you and all of your loved ones, your families, your friends, the people you care about with goodness, in Gashmius and in Ruchnius, in tangible blessings and in spiritual blessings, where you all have lots of goodness and kindness. The bonus round has been left open for us for another 2 days. If anyone knows somebody who still wants to give, it's still able. But please, thank you so much. Continue doing the good work that you're doing. And Hashem should bless you many, many times over. Thank you for joining. Wish you all a wonderful week. For those who are around Wednesday night, we're having the Jews in Maharon class. Sei gesund. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to try and answer.
Yeah,
I've got one.
Need the bracha.
Thank you, Neville. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you, Jeff.
Yes, thank you.
By Dabba the name of Shlema, Dabba Hiram of Lema Kosvarchas Mini Somalem, Yivarecha Hadene Shmerecha, you're at the Nepana Velecha Vichonecha, you saw the Nepana Velecha, be a same Lecha Shalom. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Sei gesund. Take care.
Sei gesund. See you next week.
Please God, be well. Any questions?
Yeah, I've got one question.
Please.
Right. Now, Moses struck the rock and the water came out.
Yes.
Now, thousands of people came out of Egypt.
Yes.
How long would it have taken before everybody could have had the share of the water and the animals as well?
I don't know the answer to the question, but I believe that it wasn't long because the water was divided. The way it worked is the well, every time they stopped in a place, the leader of each tribe, this is brought down in the Medrash, it's unbelievable to think of it in practical terms, would take his staff and draw a line in the ground, literally draw a line from where the well was until his tribal camping site. And that line would turn into a canal of water. And the rock would produce enough water to fill. We just had emails from the water utility, United Utilities, whatever it is, that the water supply, they're trying to fill enough water into the pipelines, but people are using so much water. Could you imagine the water pressure necessary in these canals to bring so much water for that many people? That was part of the miracle.
Well, yes, I've never heard the explanation before.
Amazing. Yeah, but you practically, it's a great question. How did it work?
Yeah.
Amazing. You've got to imagine they needed to have water for themselves, for their animals, for washing, mikveh. There were so many needs for water they would have had to have, and it's boiling hot desert. Yes, great question.
Great, thank you.
Fantastic. Have a wonderful week, Malcolm.
Yeah, just one more comment.
Please.
You were talking about behavior of people.
Yes.
Well, it's no different from what's happened this week in this country, that the way people have behaved.
Let's look at the good things in life.
Anyway, thanks very much.
Zagazon, Malcolm. Be well.
Zagazon, have a good week. Little girls as well.
Thank you. Say bye-bye to Malcolm.
Thank you. I'll get back to my baking now.
There you go. Off you go. Doing good things. Yaina!
Right. Shalom.
When is the big move?
Levy.
I'm all in.
Can you please
See
repeat?
it? I've just baked it. Made a ginger cake.
Ah, delicious. Make a mazonas bracha. Don't forget.
Right. Ouch. It's still warm. Got to get it out.
Yaina, repeat which. Remind me. What we looking for?
Please, can you repeat from the point of comparing Torah with water, that you
Yes.
have to speak to
Right.
hard people who are strong as a rock or stubborn as a rock with the softness. I had
Yes.
to leave the computer, so I didn't hear you the last 5 minutes.
No problem. Yeah. So the answer is like this: the Rabbi Zevin, actually, who's a good friend of the Rebbe, writes that a rock. First of all, he talks about the rock being compared to a heart. He says, particularly when someone has a stone heart, that means somebody doesn't care, someone who's apathetic. Sometimes we have family that don't care for what we care about, or we have friends that don't care for what we care about, and we think, oh, if only I could convince them. And here is the lesson. If I want to help somebody grow, it's not about proving or forcing physically or forcing mentally or emotionally manipulating people that they have to go and grow. It's much more effective to talk and encourage. Gentle, pleasant words, uplifting words, because although sometimes we do need to have firm frameworks, the example we used was perhaps in a classroom setting or in a family children setting, or we use the sports example if you have a team. Now, if you have a team of football, so the coach has to be very firm with them, and every often he'll talk to them very strong. But he knows that if he wants them to grow, it's going to have to help them believe in themselves. He's going to have to talk gently to them. The idea that we're learning here is that the rock is a person's heart, and drawing water out of it is the idea of bringing life out of a hard rock. And the way to do that is by talking softly and gently. That was the fourth lesson that we had. Yeah? Makes sense? Fantastic. Very good. Yaina, I'm going to leave you to it.
Right, you do.
Thank you.
Just got myself a new Shabbos urn.
Oh! Yaina, you know what a Shabbos urn is?
Yeah, well, the other one, the metal corroded on it.
Hey, you don't want to be drinking rust. Not a good idea. Not a good idea.
I had to throw it away.
Hey, what's with the move?
It's happening today, so today is the last push. So today is more or less my free day, so I can dedicate it to
Do you need a hand with
removing the last
anything?
bits and cleaning it up. Sorry,
Do you need a hand with anything?
I may need a hand to put the bed in the fridge because it looks like this guy's. I don't know what is gonna happen. So the last day, the day of my official moving out is Tuesday. So maybe if nobody comes today, we can talk and decide what to do with those items.
100%. I'm thinking that I can at least leave it in the van, and that way, if anybody wants it, instead of having to leave it in the apartment, which would be tricky, they can just come there. And if nobody wants it, and we don't find any takers, I can always take it to, let's say, to some of the other charities. Maybe the one for the homeless, or there's one for the heart. What's it called? The Heart,
British Heart
Foundation.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Something like that.
yes.
So if we have somebody locally who could use it, we'll do that.
Mm.
At least we can put it in the van, so you're not trapped.
Yes.
So I
Okay.
can't imagine the fridge will stay very long. If I take the fridge and put it in the van, I think in a day it'll be gone. The bed might be a little harder, but because the bed is a double bed. When it comes to one day, we'll have a good conversation. But yeah, it's not the ideal size.
Okay. I don't know. I don't want to destroy it. So the items
No,
are
when we destroy it,
pretty-
it'll be going to a good
pretty
cause
good.
either way.
So
Either
let's
it'll go
not
to our
let's
family
not
here.
marinate them in your van, please. They're much nicer when they're fresh, not marinated. Okay, please ask around. Maybe send another message on this group where you posted the pictures. Maybe there is somebody else who.
Yeah, I will do. No problem.
Let's see.
I will do that now. I will do
So
that.
I'll be going there, so I should be there after midday and later.
So
Maybe
I was
midday
hoping to
till
go out
6.
with the kids because they haven't seen much of me over the last week.
Yes.
So we're gonna go out for the day. So by the evening time, I should be back. Are you planning on staying to the evening?
Yes, sure.
Okay, so let's do that.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Right.
Yeah, be well.
Enjoy the
Keep
day, man.
focused.
Yes.
Don't forget to
yes,
rap
Yes.
every day, every day. Very good. Be well.
Okay,
Call
you too.
toast.
Thank you very much for the
Right,
lesson.
when is
Bye
this?
bye. Bye bye, Malcolm.